Encryption is the rearranging of data in an effort to prevent spying. You don't want people to see your data, so you encrypt it. You rearrange all the characters or you rearrange the file contents. And there's many types of encryption. For example, in Windows, you can encrypt files with EFS, the encrypting file system. And when you do that, they show as green in Windows Explorer or File Explorer. You can also use BitLocker to encrypt entire hard drives. You could use third-party programs like WinZip to encrypt and compress files. But we're more interested right now in wireless encryption. Basically, wireless networking data transfers should always be encrypted. And here's a table showing the various wireless protocols that you should know for the exam. And the first one is WEP. That stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy. And that's a deprecated, outdated protocol. Now, this is a weak encryption level. And also, this protocol was hacked. It is an outdated protocol that you shouldn't use. You will see the option on most SOHO routers, wireless access points, just so you have backward compatibility if you have nothing else that you can run on a client. But really, it should be avoided. And the next one is WPA, which is secure. That's Wi-Fi protected access. And this runs at 128-bit encryption level. And then the second version of that, WPA2, and that's the recommended one that you should use as long as your clients are compliant with that. And that's 256-bit encryption level. So for the wireless connectivity, WPA2 is the way to go. WPA is also acceptable, but WEP should be avoided. Now, once you connect, you need to encrypt all the data, and there's been various options for that. One is TKIP, Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. That's also deprecated and not recommended for use. That's 128-bit encryption level. And there's also CCMP, which kind of alleviated some of the problems with TKIP. That stands for Counter Mode with Cipher Block Chaining Message Authentication Code Protocol. There's a good acronym for you. Also 128-bit. But really, the best one to use to encrypt the data is AES. And that's the Advanced Encryption Standard. This is, for now, unhackable. And it can run at 128, 192, or 256-bit versions. If you're running 256-bit AES on your wireless connection, or say on a connection to a website, that connection data is really not going to be able to be decrypted by any supercomputer in any quick amount of time. So AES is the way to go. So what you're looking for here on a wireless access point is you want to run with WPA2 and AES. And you want your clients to be compatible with that. They have to be able to run these. If they can't, you might need a software update, or you might just need a new network adapter that could do WPA2 and AES. Another example of a deprecated protocol is WPS, and this allows a person to connect with a 8-digit code automatically to a SOHO 4-port router. This has been cracked, and so it shouldn't be used either. You want to make sure that you disable that on your router. So a couple things to watch for: WEP, TKIP, and WPS. Make sure that you're not using those. And if we look at our router once again here, this is our AC1750 router with wireless access point. We're running security right now. Generally, you're not going to have this set, disable security. No, you want to run security. So we're running WPA, and you have your choice here. Now, they have it set to automatic by default. But again, if you can get away with it, run WPA2 and have all the clients run WPA2 as well, and set that specifically. And then for encryption, again, it's recommended you stay away from TKIP nowadays, unless you have to use that for client connections. But AES is the way to go. And then you set the password. And make sure it's something complex, whatever it's going to be. And really, complex means uppercase, lowercase. So you might have something like uppercase P, lowercase r, and then also numbers like 0 and more letters and special characters and so on. And you want it to be at least 15 characters in a lot of cases if you can get away with it. 8 to 10 is decent. 15 is highly secure. So we want it to be complex and lengthy so that it won't be cracked. Now, you might also use the enterprise version of this. By default, you'll use the PSK, or pre-shared key. And that means that each client that connects needs to know the password, and they'll negotiate that password with this particular router, with this wireless access point. But you could have an outside server. You could have a separate server altogether take care of that authentication. And you would do that with WPA Enterprise. And again, we would select the version of the connection, the type of encryption, but we would need to know the server. So, maybe the server's 10.254.254.151. And that server will use port 1812 by default. And then you'd put a password in for that as well. For the radius password, you need to know the server password. But then that server, that separate radius server, might be a Windows server or what have you, that'll take care of the authentication between the client and the access point. And that actually takes care of that authentication side of it. So know this for the test. If you need to use an outside server, a secondary unit for the actual authentication, then that's going to be a radius server in most cases, and that's going to be WPA for the enterprise. It's for larger networks. And again, you'll probably want to go WPA2 and AES, but you have to know that server IP, what the IP address is of that server that's running radius. And by default, you'll use 1812. If the server could be set up with a different port, you'd have to know what that port is, but generally it's 1812 by default. So you have two options there, PSK or enterprise. If you're in a SOHO network, a small office or home office, generally you're going to go with WPA2 personal and use that pre-shared key. And this device will take care of the translation back and forth, the encryption between the clients and the wireless network. So remember, the best ones to use, WPA2 or WPA, along with AES for the encryption of the data.